an unusual thing also about this kind of populism that we're seeing both in Spain and in the United States is, and this is a weird thing to say, admittedly, but I think it's generally recognized by reasonable people, I hope, that we're really not as bad off and as ignored by mainstream politics as people are in the Rust Belt and in the heartland and in the flyover states in the United States. Is they're not really poor. They're not poor in the sense that, in an objective international metric of what poverty is. I mean, Spain is poor. Spain, we have 21% unemployment in Spain, one of the poorest countries in Europe, and we're not poor. You take a person from a poor country, and you take them by the hand and you walk them through Spain, or you walk them through the poor like Romania or Greece, they'll quickly come to they'll look around and say, these people aren't poor. They're not poor at all. And even poor people in the United States has 4% unemployment, something like that. Even poor people in the United States, the poorest of the poor in the United States, because of the wealth of the country, because of the robustness, essentially, of the economy, the poor people in the States are going to use up and throw away more plastic and potable water and fuel than most people in the developing world are ever going to even see. So it's very, I guess you have to do it for a political campaign. You have to look at these people who are suffering, and they suffer greater percentages or greater rates of unemployment than potentially they suffered, the economic boom of the 50s and 60s, and say, well, we really need to listen to these people. Maybe, yeah. I mean, obviously we want to provide jobs for everyone, but they're not suffering in the conventional sense of, wow, like they're really suffering, maybe even like the Germans were suffering when they elected Hitler, because, there was the Depression, which affected Europe, and then the United States, because of its depression, called in all of the debts that Germany had, and people were really in bad shape in Germany after the Wall Street crash. And I don't really know if we have that in the States. I don't think we have such breadline level suffering to think that a kind of populist leader is the answer. They're just, I don't know. I mean, once again, it's we know that Hillary won the popular vote, so most people don't really think that this guy has the answer, or necessarily there's such a big problem that needs to be responded to this way. Regarding hillbillies, obviously not, I don't want to offend anybody who's really a hillbilly, but the day of the election, my wife and I were watching an on-demand documentary on TV, just trying to see something relatively harmless. And it was, strangely enough, it was a documentary about Latinos in the United States and Latino immigrants. And it was about Los Angeles, Texas, and Iowa. And there was a place in Ottumwa, Iowa, where there was a slaughterhouse that was going to move to another place because there was no labor force for the renovation they were doing, and all these Latinos came moving in to Ottumwa, Iowa, to work at this place, and it had interviews in the different sectors that the documentary was dealing with. It was a U.S. documentary dubbed into Spanish, and all the Spanish people appearing, the Latinos in the documentary were speaking in English, but then it was being dubbed into Spanish for watching it in Spain. And they were interviewing people in Texas and in Iowa, white people, who initially had been suspicious of the influx of Latinos into their communities. But yeah, during the documentary, they were speaking positively about, they had gotten to know them, they were shopping in their shops, and they were working side by side with them. And watching this documentary, I was thinking, because I'm very much of the, so the Jon Stewart, Bill Maher, fairly significant degree of hostility toward small town people, conservatives, religious people, really, really angry at Spain, especially during this election cycle. And it really seemed to me, I was watching this documentary, and it occurred to me that vilifying them, as I am wont to do, and as Bill Maher constantly does on his show, and as we do frequently on Facebook, it just isn't working. Vilifying them and expecting them to wake up and recognize how terrible they are, or how ignorant they are, or how superstitious they are, it just isn't going to happen. It seemed to be plan A and vilifying them was plan A, and then plan B was like amping up the vilification. It just doesn't work. I also saw, or was listening to actually, This American Life, NPR, several months ago, and there was a report about, fairly complex report about how people canvassing neighborhoods about abortion and asking the people about their opposition to abortion on a scale of 1 to 10, and then chatting the people up and speaking to them at length for 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour, and then maybe even introducing a personal story of having had an abortion or knowing someone who had an abortion, what it's like to have unwanted children, unwanted pregnancies. And at the end of the chat, they asked the people again on a scale of 1 to 10 how opposed they were to abortion, and the numbers had changed significantly. The basis of the report is that entire experiment was proven to be false. The data had been cooked. It hadn't really happened. The guy who had carried out the survey was disgraced. And then, because there really hadn't been as many respondents as he had claimed that there were. But then, the second shoe to drop was that somebody actually did the same experiment with a real, authentic, verifiable number of respondents, and the results were largely the same. That people, upon engaging with someone who wants to speak to them calmly and at length about certain social issues, move where they are on the scale and become vaguely more tolerant. And that, and the documentary I was watching about the Latinos in Ottumwa, Iowa, really made me think that this kind of confrontation between urban areas in the States and rural, small town areas is not going to be resolved during a political campaign. I don't know how it's going to be resolved. But other types of mechanisms of anthropological, sociological, educational mechanisms need to come into play, rather than simply going there and saying, I feel your pain, I recognize your problems, and then ignoring them. There are ways in which people, over time, become, vaguely more tolerant, more progressive as in terms of progressiveness as it was defined maybe 10, 20, 30 years earlier by other people. But they begin moving forward. They begin changing their opinions, and they begin becoming the people that are going to be the mainstream people, 20, 30 years down the line. They're going to have those values. So maybe this is just an idea. Maybe like on Facebook, we shouldn't really unfriend our Trump supporter friends. I see a lot of that on Facebook. I'm unfriending the people. And so you can. It's fine. Unfriend them. I'm not going to recommend friending more Trump supporters, more Republicans. But if you have people in your friends list who are Republicans, conservative, religious, I don't know, maybe you could find like some more imaginative way of engaging them. It's just a guess. I don't know what that would be. Just sending them links that they might find interesting. Send links of conservative people who have come to, like reverends or, ministers or something, who have come to the conclusion that something needs to be done about gun violence, or have come to some conclusions about Latinos, because there was a Catholic priest in this documentary I saw who was like really working with the Latino community. He had learned Spanish to be able to like deal with the Latinos. He was really in love with them, or people, ministers and religious people who've come to some conclusion about homosexuals. Send them those links, and maybe they'll read them, and it'll modify their thinking in some way.